Hey there. Thanks for tuning in to the Intellectual Investor Podcast. This is a special episode, the Business Brew Podcast interview. If you're more the reading type, you can read this article and subscribe to receive more at contrarianedge.com or through the link in this episode's show notes at investor.fm. The Business Brew Podcast interview. This special episode features Vitaliy's conversation with Bill Brewster on the Business Brew Podcast. They have a wide-ranging conversation that includes Tesla, tribalism in investing, inflation, how Vitaliy uses macro, the Dotcom 2.0 crash, and more. Enjoy!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Brew. I am your host, Bill Brewster. I hope you're all having a fantastic week. Joined this week by Vitaliy Katsenelson. Vitaliy is the author of Soul in the Game, The Little Book of Sideways Markets, Active Value Investing, everything that you can find at contrarianedge.com. He writes a daily blog. The man has incorporated writing into his process in a way that I think we can all learn from. He's become a friend over the past, I'd say, 2 to 3 years. And he's generally someone that, every time I talk to him, I have a great time. Hung out with him at Fort Lauderdale, and I think it was 2021, and it was just really nice. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation that we have. This episode is brought to you by Bastier Partners. Bastier Partners is a new breed of investment and merchant bank that specializes in primaries, secondaries, and co-investment opportunities in the private markets. Bastier caters to a unique coverage universe of 250 plus family offices, venture capitalists, and crossover hedge funds. While sector generalists, the firm specializes in fast-growing technology and technology-enabled businesses, advising companies on primary capital raises and creating liquidity events for founders and early investors via secondary transactions. The firm also advises fundless sponsors and GPs on co-investment opportunities. Bastier Partners was found nearly a decade ago by Nader Afshar, friend of the pod and a great dude, and also a former senior investment banker at JP Morgan, and is headquartered in Los Angeles. Check them out. Tell your friends. Thank you to Bastier and Nader for sponsoring the pod. Much appreciated. It's been great getting to know you. Securities are offered through Hollister Associates LLC, member of FINRA and SIPC. Bastier Partners and Hollister Associates LLC are not affiliated companies. Enjoy the episode.
Thrilled to be joined today by Vitaliy Katsenelson. We are discussing his many books. How many books do you have, man? You got, 4 now?
3.
Including this?
Well, I got a Tesla book left. So I don't know if I want to count it as a book. So if you count Tesla, it would be 4, but I don't count it as a book. So really 3. So
are you counting the intellectual investor in there, or is that never to be
that
seen?
one never finished it. I never finished that one. So it's still in progress, I guess. I don't know if I ever get to it or not.
The Tesla book was one of my, I enjoyed that. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I remember when you wrote it, and I remember it was a very controversial thing for value investors to write about. And it seemed like you got open-minded and did like a real deep dive and were surprised by what you found.
Yeah, so it's originally I wrote it as it was published as a book, but really what I did was a long research paper. Really, just that's what it really was, not really a book. So what happened was I bought Model 3, and I was so blown away by that car. And I am not a car guy at all. I don't care. Before that car, I drove the same car for 10 years or something. So before that car, I'm not a car guy. But I was so blown away by that it just made me realized that we are in the middle of this incredible shift. And I ended up spending 2 or 3 months doing deep research on the car industry, Tesla, and everything. And I ended up writing maybe 15,000 word essay, basically, or research paper on Tesla. And one thing I realized, and this is very important, like if you're on Twitter, there's 2 camps, Tesla and Tesla Q, okay? And these 2 tribes are basically talking past each other. It's either you hate Tesla or you love Tesla. There's nothing in between. What I learned, and this is, by the way, this is what you learn in the stock market in general, things are a lot more nuanced. Tesla is when you talk about Tesla, you have to be able to hold 2 opposing thoughts. When you talk about Elon Musk, you can recognize his genius, but he also recognized that often lack of ethics. So it's as an example. So I ended up doing an incredible amount of work, learned a lot, and never bought the stock. So I bought the car, never bought the stock. But some people would say that I wasted my time. I would argue that knowledge is cumulative. So what I learned from that research, helped me to apply to will help me in the future, and also help me to do other investment decisions or non-decisions.
Yeah, well, the non-decisions are as important as the actual decisions, right?
Absolutely.
What did you find that most surprised you about that research project?
I started researching. I thought, well, companies like General Motors or Ford will be able to come up with cars that are going to be as good as Tesla, and that Tesla has a competitor, and that those kind of traditional car companies have an advantage versus Tesla. And I realized that it's actually not necessarily the case, because you look at the electric car and ICE car, and they kind of look like cars, but on the surface they look the same, but inside they look very different. Just like if you compare the BlackBerry to iPhone, kind of look like phones, but they're completely they exist in very different domains.
Yeah.
One of the most important insights I had when I was doing my research, I realized that when Chrysler came up with minivan in 1980s, that was kind of revolutionary. Everybody looked at it as a revolutionary vehicle, but it was evolutionary. It didn't really take much time for General Motors and other companies to copy it, right? Well, when you go from a ICE car to electric car, that is a change in the domain. Meaning it's like going from dumb phones to smartphones. It's changing the domain, even though the name is a phone, but one is really a device that makes phone calls. Another one is a computer that does hundreds of other things and also makes phone calls. So the skills you had when you were making ICE car or dumb phone may actually work against you when you make electric car or smartphone. Let me give you an example. General Motors, just think about it, just normal car. It has, General Motors has probably thousands and thousands of engineers that are trying to squeeze every ounce of power out of this ICE engine, right? Well, because that engine is a very complex piece of equipment. Well, that knowledge is completely useless when it comes to electric cars. So where in your traditional cars you have a lot of computers, but it's mostly hardware and a little bit software. In the electric car, it's almost like a software as important as hardware. So now you need to have a very different type of workforce. So Tesla has thousands of engineers working on it, right, in software. So Tesla has to be both good at software and hardware, and so are the ICE car companies, and those skills are not native for them. So, what I learned is basically that your past knowledge may actually hinder you because you try to do you will basically the baggage from past domain, from the old domain, will hinder your thinking when in the new domain. One beautiful example: if you ever look at the Tesla chassis, it's basically it's kind of, it looks like a skateboard, and there are two engines. They're like motors, actually, not engines, the size of watermelon that sit on each end. But when the General Motors were making their first car, they didn't do that. They actually did a transmission because they know how to make transmissions. So they put a motor and connected it to so they. You see how they they were stuck in the old thinking.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the most important insights I learned.
Have you ever watched the documentary Who Killed the Electric Car?
Is that about the
General Motors EV from I think it was the late 80s? It's super interesting. People liked it. They loved them. And at least according to this documentary, and I don't know how much editorial license they had, but it wasn't generating enough service revenue. And there was a clause that allowed people, I believe that there was a clause that General Motors didn't allow people to exercise that was supposed to let them buy the car, and General Motors eventually just said no, and they crushed them all. Kind of interesting to think, had they not done that, where would they be today?
Yeah, no, I think so. There are so many biases. It's so difficult to, Tesla. So let me make this point. I think Tesla is one of the most important things that has happened to our world over the last 20 years. I would say iPhone is number one, Tesla is number two. Why? Because if it wasn't for Tesla, ICE companies would never take electric cars seriously. And we probably would not see a true electric car for maybe 20, 30 years. Okay, because there were no incentives. I think what I was somewhat surprised now how serious. I mean, I'm positively surprised how much General Motors and Ford and others actually embraced electric cars now, and trying to come out with electric cars. And I think they're just scared when they look at other companies that became irrelevant. Look at Motorola, right? Or other companies that became irrelevant because of iPhone. I think that Tesla actually scared them into action and gave them and they realized if they just focus on milking ICE vehicles, they'll be fine for a while until they'll become BlackBerry.
Yeah. I have found it interesting when people say, or I've heard people say the Tesla driver doesn't like Teslas. They just like electric vehicles. So then when Audi came out with the e-tron, I thought to myself, well, I'll go drive that to see if it's really the same. Mm-hmm. And the way that thing drives is not even close to the feel of the Model 3 or the Model S. There's just so much torque in the way that Teslas drive. Even the low I drove one of the really early Model S's. My grandma got one, and then she now has Model 3, and she doesn't have the souped up version. And man, when you step on the gas of those things, they move.
Oh, Bill, it's that, but it's so much more than that. I mean, it's also the software, the app. It's also the service. I had some kind of weird smell in my car. I went to my app and I ordered the service. They texted me and said, I need to replace the air filter. And if I agree, they'll come out to my work, replace it. So it costed me, I don't know, $150. But I didn't have to spend a minute of my time dealing with that because they came, they opened my car, they replaced it, they left. I never saw them. And they charged my credit card. Some people would say, that, if I did this with ICE car, it would cost me $50, $70, maybe. Or if I replaced it myself, it cost me $15. Fine. But I would never replace it myself anyway. But the $50, $70, that would require how much of my time?
Yeah.
So they, I think this, their service is so much better. once a month or once every couple of months, suddenly, I get into my car and there's a software update that adds new features. Just all those features could be copied. And I think at some point they will get copied. But right now, Tesla is still far ahead of everybody else, by a huge mile.
Yeah. I was talking to a buddy about Ferrari, and I know this may sound crazy, but I said, I just kind of wonder if as they transition to electric, I wonder if they're going to be able to keep the brand that they currently have. And, I wouldn't be shocked if they can, right? But I would argue, at least from a stock perspective, it sort of implies that they will. So what is, I think a relevant question is, can they?
I have a good analogy for you. In 1920s, when people were still had carriages and horses, like right now, when I have a few friends who say I will never buy an electric car because I like the sound that the engine makes in my car. And I'm sure in the 1920s, when some people were buying cars, their neighbors were saying, "No, I'm never going to buy a car because I love how my horse breathes when I take my horse. I like the breathing." So my point is, there's still horse racing happening today, right?
Yeah.
It's probably not as popular as NASCAR racing. So Ferrari will have to adapt, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't adapt, they'll become they're going to have the best breed of horses, and they're going to have a horse, and so that's what they're going to become.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably right. And I just kind of, to me, a lot of Ferrari is styling. A lot of it is the legacy. I think I understand what they get from Formula One, but I also think a lot of it's the sound. And I just kind of wonder about an electric world. And I don't know, maybe they have some false sound, but that just doesn't feel the same. So I don't know. Who knows?
Well, I think it's in racing. Ferrari has this advantage because the car is incredibly complex, and they spend 10, 15 times more money than the rest of most of the other teams. Electric cars, almost by definition, are less complex.
Yeah,
and therefore it's more difficult for Ferrari to have that kind of advantage.
Yeah, that's what I kind of wonder about, right? I mean, I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting to watch. What else you've been writing about inflation lately? What else has got, what are the big market things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, no, I think, so let's talk about inflation. So we have inflation coming at us from so many directions. I mean, you can argue the original sin was the kind of QE, like not the first one, the unlimited QE for a long time. And then government just, throw money from helicopter. So that was kind of the original sin. But, and then we paid people not to work. So that helped, that reduced our labor force. So that caused inflation. But then I almost look at this second wave of inflation that started to come almost at the same time when the war in Ukraine started. So, so let's look. Oil was already going up even before the war, and oil was going up because oil prices were so low for so long. Pandemic didn't help, so the supply was just shrinking. And on top of that, ESG, big oil companies became suddenly big oil companies, and ESG hates them. Oil was already, oil prices were already going to go up even before the war. Now you bring Russia, into the mix, and Russia produced about 10-11% of world's oil, and now we're going to consume less of Russian oil. So that's going to put even more stress on that market. Natural gas market, kind of similar dynamics. So you have inflation coming from oil prices. You got that. Another source of inflation is Chinese lockdowns, right? The Chinese manufacturers for the world, and now they're locking down cities because of zero COVID policy. So you're going to have you have inflation coming from that's another source of new inflation, or relatively new inflation. Higher interest rates. They are like incredibly important for our economy. period. So think about it. If you average house in the United States, a median house costs about $450,000, which is up, I don't know, a lot, 20, 30% from a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Okay. The median, when interest rates go from 2.8 to 5.2, the cost of a 30-year mortgage goes up. I mean, so when the 10-year, when mortgage rates go from 2.8 to 5.2, the cost of annual cost of the mortgage is about increased by about $7,000. Let me put it in the right context. I think median income in the United States is about $67,000. That is a 10%. That's a basically just consumes 10% of somebody's income.
Yeah.
Okay, but I wanted to think about something. So you basically buying the same house, you're just paying $7,000 more. So the impacts from this are, I see several impacts. Number one, I think a very good chunk of incremental spending in the economy came from because people felt wealthier and had that wealth. So they would basically sell the house, take some equity out, and spend this money at Home Depot or whatever, or travel. Well, as housing prices start declining, I think they would have to, because it's not that, it's not like when the housing prices go up as much as they have, and interest rates go up, suddenly this house has become unaffordable. So banks will not lend you money. So the banks basically say, you would like to buy this house? We would love to give you money, but the price has to be much lower. So I think that's going to have a significant impact on the housing market, and therefore that's going to translate into weakness in the economy because consumer spending will decline. Also, consumer spending get hit by as we mentioned by oil, but there is another inflationary risk. And we haven't felt all of it yet, but I think we'll feel in the next six months to a year, food inflation.
Yeah.
Second and third largest producers of fertilizer, potash, Belarus and Russia. And exports from there, actually from Russia probably down to zero, close to it. Belarus probably down as a lot as well. So potash prices doubled or tripled. Also, another fertilizer, which is nitrogen, which is not very important fertilizer, it's mostly made out of natural gas. So natural gas price up a lot. So what we're going to see that the cost of all calories will go up, and it's going to impact poorer nations and poor people in the wealthy nations, a lot more. So I'll give you a kind of interesting statistic. I think in the Russia or Ukraine, average household spends about 40% of the income on food. We spend about 7 or 10.
Yeah.
But that's for the whole country, right? If you're the poorer you are, the larger the percentage is. So anyway, so you look at the consumer in general. To me, that looks like a weak, like going to be a weak link in the economy. And consumer is 2/3 of the economy. So you can see how I get, I'm not very excited about the health of our economy, for a period of time.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that's nice about living here is we do have pretty cheap natural gas. And to the extent that any shale gets turned back on, we may get a little bit more gassy wells that spit out more gas. And thankfully, we've got our own fertilizer supply. But I think food is concerning. My general view on housing is that the economy is definitely going to slow. I don't know what happens to prices. The Lennar and what is it? KHB is the ticker. Mm-hmm. They reported, and I didn't think that they sounded particularly scared in general on housing yet. But the Logan always talks about Motoshami. He always talks about the thing is the builders are going to protect their margins, right? So the natural consequences, they're just going to build fewer and fewer homes, and it does kind of seem like there's a chance, I guess, that mobility decreases, prices don't actually crater like some people are projecting. But I agree with you that like the multiplier effect, there's this NBER paper from 2007 called The Housing Cycle is the Business Cycle. And it lays out why housing is so important to the economy. And it's going to be tough if housing slows materially. It's going to be really tough to have the economy power through that.
So I think looking at the housing market just from a perspective of builders is the complete way to look at it. Because I don't remember the numbers, but I would argue, I'm guessing right now, that most sales, probably 90% of sales come from existing homes, and maybe 10% from. So from a builder perspective, maybe, but it's going to be very difficult. So okay. First of all, let me tell you where I agree with you. I think the housing market is a very different animal than the markets you and I deal with on a daily basis, right? Because people get anchored to the last price they saw, and it takes them a long time before they say, I have to lower the price.
Yes.
So I think at first what happens is that the activity declines.
Yes.
Okay, so you and I agree on this. I think then a lot of people who were going to move, well, for another thing I agree with you on, and this is the number of transactions will decline for another reason, is that if you were going to sell a house and you were going to move to a different neighborhood in the same city, now that house you were going to buy is going to cost you a lot more just because you
the
locked
mortgage
in at
payment.
30. Exactly, yeah. So that's going to add to that, right?
And you might wipe out your equity if you go to sell, right? Like, so you've got a fixed payment that you can afford in the house that you own.
Yes.
Versus you've got to find a buyer that wants to pay you the price at current rates, and then you've got to find that you want, and then you've got to find a seller that's willing to sell to you at the price that you want to buy at.
Yeah.
That's going to be tough.
I think you and I can agree on something 100% right now, that you don't want to be a more real estate broker right now. Basically.
Yes, we do agree on that.
That's not a profession you want to go into unless you have a masochistic tendencies. Yeah. So, but I think what's going to happen at some point, some people have to move.
Mm-hmm.
So there is when you think about housing, right? There is some of it is like, I would like to, and some of it I have to. Right. So I think I would like to, those people would probably, like, a lot of those sales would decline. I mean, the number of transactions would decline because, some people have to move. And I think those are the transactions that will move the housing prices lower.
Yeah.
I think. And I think what happens after that, the housing prices are priced on the past sales. And therefore, those are the sales that will reset the housing prices lower, but it takes time.
Yeah.
So again, I'm just like, when you and I talk about individual stocks, I have a lot more confidence because that's the microeconomics. Mm-hmm. When we talk about macroeconomics, I look at macroeconomics from a perspective. There are a couple of frameworks. Number one, Seth Klarman says that we worry macro, invest micro, and I agree with that. And another one, I almost look at it, I don't want to be a weatherman. I want to be a climatologist when I look at, as an investor. In other words, as an investor, I spend most of my time analyzing individual companies, and I don't spend much time thinking what the Federal Reserve is going to do next.
Yeah.
Because that requires a huge amount of effort, and it has a very short-term shelf life. What I try to do is kind of identify a climate changing events and kind of position our portfolio, to avoid them or benefit from them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why you and I can have this discussion about all these different things. And I'll be the first one to tell you that economies is such a complex entity that's incredibly difficult to really forecast what's going to happen next. So this is why, like, I go through this mental exercises, what you and I just went through. But at the end of the day, I just, when I look at individual companies, I say, okay, well, how much exposure do I have to consumer? And I want to have less of that.
Yeah.
And that's where it ends, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the conversations that we had when you were in Fort Lauderdale, I remember, was, you just kind of said, I look at some of the growth factor, and I wonder how much of that is, rates driven or environment driven, right? And how much of the growth rates would come in if we were in a different sort of environment. And I think we're all going to find that out together.
Yeah.
And it's I guess I have like everyone in a bear market, I've gotten more interested in macro. But where I do think it matters is I do think there's an element of reflexivity, which if you're underwriting certain individual companies, I'd argue it's important to at least have a sense of the terrain, a general sense. But I agree with you. I'm not going to be a big macro. Moving my portfolio around based on big macro thoughts is outside the scope of what I'm capable of.
Let me tell you something I've been noodling about for the last couple of weeks. I was thinking about all these .com 2.0 blow-ups. Kind of, like this. That's how I look at what's happening. Like with a lot of high-tech companies, or kind of, you can call them Cathy Wood companies, but it's more than that. Let me give you this analogy. Like I compared it to .com, like of 1999. And there's a lot of similarities. It's never perfect. It's never a perfect, comparison, but there are still a lot of similarities. But one thing I realized is that if you remember Y2K, basically what it did, you already had a bubble in technology. And then Y2K scared everybody to upgrade the technology. So that in itself pulled a lot of future sales forward.
Yep. Much like COVID.
No, that's exactly where I'm going. Now, Bill, let me give you this example of a company. Let's say you have a company that's naturally growing 10% a year. That's its natural state of growth. And now, suddenly, it's 1 year, instead of doing 10% growth, it does 40%. And everybody thinks that actually maybe that's the new rate of growth. So what happens, so what happens is this. Management now thinks, well, we can't be not prepared for year 2 where the growth is high again. We can't, because we'll get fired. So what do? They hire a lot more people. They invest more in CapEx. And then the year 2 comes and the growth is not 40%, but now is 0. And the reason it's 0 because that last year, it stole the next 3 years of growth. So now what happens, your cost structure is bloated. Like even if you were just growing 10% a year, but you instead of growing 10, you're growing at 0. And I think this is oversimplified kind of mental model, but that's the mental model I would be using when I would be when I was analyzing a lot of those digital darlings, because I think a lot of them basically. So what happens, and I kind of recognize this as a CEO of my company. Whenever I can only handle I can only focus on so many things at a time. When you're growing very fast, I don't think as much about expenses, and I think about growth, right? If the growth, stops, I'll be spending a lot more time thinking about expenses and, etc. So I think what happened to a lot of these companies, they probably did not have, when they were growing, suddenly growth accelerated, and they were already growing before this, they probably had a much looser expense structure.
100%.
Also, they were competing for scarce talent, against the competitors. And I think we're going to go through this very difficult time where a lot of them are going to have to go through this significant restructuring of, and so as I look at these companies, I realize as an investor, I need to realize that things will probably get worse before they get better, probably a lot worse before they get better. And I would have to be buying them when things look horrible, okay? But that's when probably going to be opportunities going to be, I would have to almost close my eyes to some degree. But and at that point, have a little bit richer imagination to realize that, things will get better for them. But first, they'll get a lot worse.
Yeah.
And so that's how I look at this kind of .com 2.0 blow up.
I actually think part of what you're touching on is some of the argument to fade the inflation narrative a little bit. In that, it was funny, in 2019, I was talking to a buddy who was kind of in like a YPO for tech execs. And he said to me, I said it at the time on Value After Hours or whatever, but he said, a lot of the execs that I am friends with are hiring engineers, in like insane amounts of engineers. And they know that it's not the economic thing to do, but they're doing it because they want to brag about how many engineers are joining their firm, because valuations are being dependent upon how much growth they're having. And it's not a bottom line driven issue at all. It's we hired X engineers and we have these perks and look at how much we're growing. And he said some of them are flat out saying, like, we only have one chance to get really, really rich, and this is our chance. So we're not worried about the bottom line. In a world where people start worrying about the bottom line, I could see labor becoming a little less tight. And then on top of that, Walmart had mentioned that they were overstaffed because of they were expecting more people out with Omicron than actually went out. So they were sort of overstaffed. So then they're going to lay off some people to get right-sized again. It'll be interesting to see in a year and a half what we're all discussing. Something tells me we might be discussing deflation at that point. But
I think the road to deflation is through stagflation, right?
Yeah.
In other words, and I agree with you 100%. I think that's the risk, right? It's the one thing we haven't touched on, which I think that's and again, this is where you become on one hand, on the other hand, economist kind of thing. One thing that's, I don't know what to think about is that as interest rates rise, our government is going to have to, our government is basically going to feel the impact of $30 trillion of debt we have, which we haven't before.
Yeah.
And just think about it, 1% increase. I understand that not all debt is flowing. Our debt, I think only 30-something% of our debt is short-term maturities, like less than 1 year. But just think about this, very simple math. 1% increase in interest rates would cost us about $300 billion of interest expense. That is basically 1/2 or 1/3 of our defense spending. It might be 1/3 of our defense spending. 3% would be equivalent to our defense spending today. Just think about that. So That means the government it's not going to cut, the government is not going to spend less. That's not what it does. So it's going to print more money. So that's inflationary. So I can see inflationary and stagflationary forces at the same time. So, but I can see how, for sure, higher inflation will slow down the economy. That is a significant risk.
It stinks that we didn't issue 50-year bonds, and then we could attack them when rates go up and they go down. We could buy them back. But
absolutely,
the government is not a hedge fund.
That's right.
So, one thing I want to talk to you about is how you think about this. And the exact question is, what has writing done for you, and what does your daily routine writing look like? And I think when people hear the answer, they're going to understand the question, why I'm asking it. But you talk about it in the book, and I'd love for you to wax poetic on what writing means for you in your process.
Yeah, I would argue writing is probably one of the most important things that has happened to me as an adult. Like when I say this, I put it on par with having children, probably right there somewhere, But as a thinker, that is probably the most important thing that happened to me. Writing basically rewired my brain. I look, what the conversation you and I had, a lot of these thoughts came to me when I was writing. So I have a scattered brain, so I can't really concentrate for very long. Just, I get distracted. So I get up every morning at 5 o'clock, 4:35 o'clock, and I write for about 2 hours a day. And that is my focus time. That is the time where I do kind of this intense thinking. And that thinking basically changed the way I look at the world, because I always look it makes me more open-minded. I always look for stories. I always look for analogies, and I see and I apply mental models a lot. Because of that, I'm aware of more mental models, but I also apply them a lot more. Let me give you a mental model. Actually, I'm gonna give you a mental model that you know so well, but most of us did not even think to apply it. So what Charlie Munger says, invert, right? Well, somebody asked me recently, Vitaliy, should we be looking, like we have this inflation going on, should we be looking at 70s and 80s to see what happens to the economy, or 60s and 70s, well, I guess 70s and 80s to see what happened in the economy then? And I said, you can do that, or you can just look at what happened in the economy over the last 20 years and invert it. Just think about it, right? Because the interest rates declined. What happened? Profit margins actually ended up going higher. Price to earnings went up higher. Consumer spending was higher. Housing prices, and then, so now inverted, you say, okay, well, if interest rates go up and we had deflation, you have more, inflationary environment, you have probably lower profit margins, lower PEs, lower housing prices. Those actually, the consumer feel less wealthy. So this is a mental model that you and I know about because we go to Berkshire Hathaway every year and we hear, Charlie Munger say it, but actually applying it, often it's a very different animal, right? So writing, kind of what it does for me, it allows another way to look at it. I'm a big believer in a conscious, subconscious mind relationship. And let me just be very clear. When I talk about subconscious mind, I'm not talking about my mind connecting to the universe of other subconscious minds. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just basically look at our mind structure as two computers. One, conscious mind and subconscious mind. We aware what's going on in our conscious mind, okay, because it's available to us. Subconscious mind, Bill, think about how many books you read over the years. How many of them you remember? Probably very
not
few.
That many, maybe 15 or so.
Not that many.
Like if you just asked me to pull it up.
Yeah, but even from every page you read, even from the books you remember,
Soul in the Game is one of them.
Oh, well, thank you. But because you have to reread it twice a day now.
Shantaram is another for those that are looking for fiction.
My point is this: all the reading we do, we just can recollect some of that, but a lot of it actually goes into our subconscious mind. So it's not completely lost to us. So when I write, what it does, it's basically focus. This is how I'm accessing my subconscious mind. It's a knowledge that I have, but it's kind of below the surface, and it's the focus. It's a focused energy. It's the focused process, of connecting conscious subconscious mind that allows me to get those thoughts out onto a piece of paper. And I tell you, when I write, part of the reason why I love writing, because I am as shocked to what I wrote as people, because it surprises me all the time. I'm like, oh, I did not know I think that, and this is what writing does for me. So it has been probably the most, one of the most important things for me, and it added me 20 IQ points, which I needed desperately, and it made me much better investor, and I think a much better human being in general.
Do you handwrite or do you type?
No, I can't. So I have no muscle memory of handwriting.
Huh.
I can, but I haven't done it in so long. So now I type. So I get up at 5. So this is how it looks. I get up at 5 a.m. I have a writing chair, and I have a laptop sitting right next to it and headphones. I go downstairs, make Americano, do 30 push-ups, go upstairs, and start writing for 2 hours.
Just one Americano? You said that you drink a lot of coffee in the book.
Well, so
but then you stop at 8 a.m.
Yeah, no, let me tell you what happened. So I found maybe 6 months or a year ago that actually, when I came to the office, I've been drinking insane amount of coffee, like 6 cups of coffee. And a lot of it was happening mindlessly because I would be sitting at my desk, I would get bored, I would go get coffee because I kind of liked the taste. And I drank 6 cups of coffee. So I have this new hack. For every cup of coffee I drink, I have to do 30 push-ups. So my consumption of coffee declined to 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Your chest is like, I don't want to do this.
Well, because it's not been mindless, right? Because when I have to do a push-up, I'm like, do I really want to do push-ups? Like, so
Yeah.
it's good for, I'm healthier, and I'm, because I'm drinking less coffee, and I'm healthier because I'm doing push-ups.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my new hack that I think I've been doing it for maybe 12 months now. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit? You wrote a piece that I called you up after last week. You wrote it about Putin, and I thought part of the book that was a part of you that I had never really realized was growing up a Russian Jew, and I didn't realize how scarce your upbringing was. And then, the other thing that this doesn't have to be part of the question, but I couldn't believe is how little sunlight you saw as a kid. And now you're in Denver, which is like a real, I think you're in a better place now. But, just kind of talk a little bit about your journey. So, some people, I've talked to 2 people today that I told I was interviewing you, and they were like, oh, I'm really looking forward to that. I don't really know that much about him. I know of him, but I don't know about him.
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in Murmansk, Russia. So if you look at the Russian map, you look up, you look to the left. And when you say look up, like to the very top of it. And Murmansk is located, above the Arctic Circle. So it's a very, very cold. In the winter time, there's basically for a month or 2, there's almost no sunlight. Like I would walk in the morning to high school, to school, and it's dark. The sun comes out for 10 minutes while I'm in school, and I miss it. And when I walk back, there's no sun. It's dark again. And Bill, so if I moved to Murmansk now, I would be miserable, right? Because I live in Denver, which is the kind of the sunshine state. Maybe California wants to argue about that, but that's okay. But it's there's a lot of sunlight. I would be miserable because I'm so used to it. But because I grew up in Murmansk, that's all I knew. It didn't really bother me, just because that was kind of the reality of my life. A couple of things. Number one, there was very little vegetation, very cold, permafrost. There's very little vegetation. So we would see very little fruits and vegetables during the wintertime. To get us any vitamins, we would have to drink fish fat. Like, it's probably, we have to, that was probably our biggest source of vitamins. And I am a 5'10". My son, Jonah, is 6'4", 6'3", so something like this. And people ask me, why is he so tall? I said, well, it's very simple. I grew up with very little sunshine. If I grew up in Denver, I would have been 6'3", I would be blonde. So it was it's kind of interesting. I look back at my life, and now it looks like it was very scarce life. Like, there was a lot of scarcity. I think didn't really care like that, because if you're born into it, it seems absolutely normal. We never went really hungry. Like I don't think we ever starved. So, but my parents loved me. My parents loved me. I had a great family. So that life overall was a more or less, a happy childhood until I was 11 years old. And then my mom got brain cancer, and so I lost my mother when I was 11. That was probably that was the most traumatic experience of my life, I guess. What happened was, on a day after her 50th birthday, on the May 6, 1984, she was admitted to the hospital because she has a headache. They did the scan and they found that she has a brain cancer. And so my mom, this vibrant, beautiful woman with the brown hair, goes to the hospital. And this is the person I remember seeing. And then my father, my father sends me to pioneer camp because he has to deal with my mom's surgery, etc. And he, and just can't deal with both, with me. And I come back a few months later, and I see this woman at home who's kind of has a short gray hair, doesn't recognize me, and it's my mom. And I was shocked. So they did one or two brain surgeries, and they were not successful. And basically, my mom died in October, and I went to a psychologist right before pandemic because I had nothing was happening in my life, but I felt I had somehow I had some anxiety. I didn't know where it was coming from, and we talked a lot about it. And she said, "Well, the problem is you never really said goodbye to your mom." And if you think about it, right, because the woman I remember is my mom, is that kind of vibrant woman. And then suddenly she was disappeared. And the woman who died, I couldn't really relate.
Yeah, you went to camp, you came back, she was totally different.
Yeah. And in fact, this chapter in the book, the way I write about my mom, I actually didn't even write it for the book. My psychologist said, what you need to do, you need to go back and just relive those memories. So in how I do this, I write. So I actually wrote that part even before I sat down to write a book. That was I wrote it basically as for therapeutic reasons. And then I was writing the book. I ended up putting that into the book. So that's how that portion of the book, came about. But one thing that, kind of, I even hate saying those words, but the silver lining of this story is that my mom passing away kind of brought me closer to my father, and I appreciated him so much more. And when I say this, a lot of decisions, when we go through life, there is always something that feels more urgent to do right now. Okay, and things that we think we should be doing are kind of get superseded by this, emergence, things that kind of seem to be more urgent at this point in time. Well, I always try to override those things and intentionally spend more time with my father. So we would go for morning walks. I would go for breakfast 2 or 3 times a week. We would have breakfast 2 or 3 times a week. I make sure that when we travel together a lot. So that actually, my mom passing away in my early age made me appreciate and value my father a lot more than I would otherwise, which is weird, kind of a weird dynamic. But that's what happened. So that's kind of, that's my childhood in Russia, and
Yeah, when I was reading about your mom, I was thinking I had my first and only serious girlfriend outside of my wife. Her mother died of brain cancer, and it was really abrupt. And I never got to tell her. I mean, I know she knows how much she meant to me, but that was. I wish I had said, something while she was still here, or at least called while she was in the hospital. We weren't together when it happened, and it was like she went in 1 week with a headache, and then the next week she was gone. So I don't know. I relived a little bit of that. I think, your book is so unique because, here's a value investor, and I'm reading about, we've gone from the little book of sideways markets to, sort of life lessons, I guess would be how I would characterize this book. But, one of the things that you really let people is into your personal life and how you now look at the world. And I think that one of the takeaways that I have implemented in my life and will continue to is the idea of you only, you may be doing something for the last time, right? So enjoy it. And I don't know, kind of. I want to thank you for embedding that into my brain, because I think it's made my life a little bit better.
That is such an incredible concept. Yesterday, I met this woman who had who has a son who is a year old, and I said, I know when I had my first child, I always wanted them to get to the next stage, like when he was laying, I wanted him to crawl. When he was crawling, I wanted him to walk. When he was walking, I wanted him to be able to ride a bike. And now I look at that and I realize, and I'm kind of applying this to my actually, I'm still applying it now. And I just don't want them to, I'm just focusing on the now and not wanting the next stage, not craving for the next stage in their life. And that makes me appreciate my kids a lot more, actually, because I know that, I'll give you one example. I look forward to driving my daughters to school as a privilege, as something that, if you think about it, my Hannah is going to go to 11th grade. So I basically have 2 more years of driving her to school. That's it. So that is, I don't know how many school days, 200 something school days per year, whatever that number is. So that is only 400 more times. That's it. And so every single time I drive her to school, I try to be present. It's driving is by itself. That's not what I'm talking about. Actually, being with her in the car and being present when I'm doing it. And because there will be a time when I'll be driving her to school for the last time, and there will be a time when I drive my 8-year-old daughter, Mia Sarah, for the last time. So that concept, from Stoics, I thought it was extremely powerful. And that's and I'm glad you found it powerful too.
Yeah. I like the I like this section on Stoicism. You had it. It's actually 2 sections of the book.
Yeah.
What are what are some of the things that you think that I don't know, people that need a teaser is to go get the book? First of all, you should buy the book, folks. But second of all, what should people take from the Stoics, you think?
Yeah. So Bill, my parents never talked about this. And I don't think I ever got a formal education of how to behave and how to deal with life. I tried to learn as much. My father tried to teach me as much as possible, but I don't think he even had the tools. And basically, our behavior in life is kind of, when we're born, we are this blank piece of, we're kind of this blank thing, and then a piece of hardware, and then that software get written into that piece of hardware over time. And a lot of times it's just shaped by random experiences, by the friends we have, by our parents, by things that happen in our life. Like an example I gave you that I appreciated my father. Well, that is actually, Stoics call it negative visualization. That's a concept from direct from Stoics. It was written into me because my mom died. Completely random experience, right? That's how I appreciate my father a lot more. So what Stoic philosophy does, it provides an operating system for life. It's a system that basically helps you to handle your everyday life and reduces the negative volatility that comes with your life and allows you to frame your life differently. When I stumbled on it, I was shocked. I was just shocked how powerful that is. And in fact, to make things even more interesting, I basically finished my book. I was in the last chapter of the book when I stumbled on Stoic philosophy. So the book was done. I was literally going to send it to the publisher in a few days or something. And I stumbled on Stoic philosophy, and I told my publisher, to my editor, basically, I said, I need more time. And I didn't tell him how much. I said, I just need more time because I want to spend more time on that, because I didn't know how long it would take. And so I wrote this Stoic philosophy section, as much for myself, as much for my kids, as much for you and everybody else who's who's reading the book. And when I was writing it, I tried to do a couple things. Number one, I tried to use as much of the Stoic philosophers' voice as possible, because their writing is brilliant. So I tried to tell it through stories. I tried to make it kind of practical and interesting. And I'm the first one to admit that there's still a lot more I need to learn. But I think the basics I introduced in those 2 chapters, and there's a there's one about operating, kind of Stoic operating system, and another one about values. I think those two sections are basically give you a very good introduction. Well, you tell me, but I think they give an introduction kind of and get you interested in Stoicism. And I think if you get interested in that, the next thing you should do is to learn more. Don't stop with that.
No, I agree with that. I guess what I was thinking about as I was reading, and I've recently been going through this sort of evolution where I've begun enjoying the process much more than the outcome of whatever the heck we all do. Right. I would say collecting tidbits from the world and then trying to express it in somewhat, bets that you think you have an edge in. And, what I was taking from it, and I think it applies to the personal life. I also was applying it to investing where, it's about saying, was I wrong for the wrong reasons? Was I right for the right reasons? Was I wrong for the right reasons? Right. And the negative visualization when you're underwriting, a thesis, I think is really powerful, right? Like what could actually go wrong here for real? Was sort of the things that I was thinking about from an investment perspective. And I think, from a personal perspective, I really like the idea of, you can't control what happens to you. You can only control how you react. And I can't help but hear, do you ever listen to Zig Ziglar?
I have a long time ago, but no.
Man, he cracks me up. He's on my iPhone. For some reason, his stuff it's in my iTunes, right? So and sometimes when I get in the car, it's what auto plays. Mm-hmm. And it's just like that. He's got this older Texas accent, and this story that he tells cracks me up. And I don't even know if it's true or not, but it's great for teaching. And he's talking about how he goes to the airport. And a woman says, your flight's delayed. And he goes, fantastic. And she's like, what do you mean fantastic? Everybody else is mad. And he's like, well, if this flight wasn't delayed, you might have put the plane in the air too quickly and somebody might have not done the maintenance. And I could fall out of the sky and this could be my last day on earth or whatever. And just like I like the concept of having your mind reset to spin, your original reaction into a different light and realizing that, I forget how you refer to it in the book, but your first reaction is like your emotional reaction. And then you can control the ones thereafter.
That's right. God, there are so many things. There are a couple of things. Number one, I'm reading this book right now and I'm going blank on the name. But it talks about conscious mind, subconscious mind. And one point it makes about subconscious. So the conscious, picture a ship. You have a cruise ship. You have a captain, and then you have the engine room. Your conscious mind is the captain. The subconscious mind is the engine room. So the most of your evaluation of what happens in the conscious mind. The engine room, the subconscious mind is the one that basically runs your body. That's the one that actually executes your decisions, but it doesn't evaluate them. So when you say as a joke, oh, I'm an idiot, or I'm stupid, you know what? Subconscious mind does not understand sarcasm. So it's good. If you can talk yourself into anything you want it to be. Okay, if you do what Zig Ziglar did and said, fantastic, guess what? You actually condition yourself to accept what's happened to you as a positive thing. And this is kind of the beauty of Stoic philosophy, is that, so that like two concepts, and you kind of touched on the first one, is that the economy of control, right? This is Epictetus, Epictetus saying, there are certain things that are up to us and certain things aren't. Well, here's the reality of life. Most things are not up to us. What is up to us is how we react. Okay, how we frame things. Basically what we do. Everything else, what your wife says, if the street lights turn on when you want them to turn, if the plane is late, all those things are not up to you. Not at all. But now it's up to us to frame it. And this is what Zig Ziglar was doing, to frame what happens to us in a certain way. But like, true story, like my son, Jonah, when he called me up yesterday. So he was flying from Europe home. He got to Frankfurt. His flight, he missed his flight, not for his reasons, but because of the airline reasons. So he had to spend an extra day, 24 hours in Frankfurt, which is probably the least favorite city I have in the world. Like there are beautiful parts of Germany. Frankfurt is not one. It's not that. Huh. Anyway. So he ended up spending 24 hours in this hotel where there was no air conditioning, this kind of thing. Anyway, he shows up and he's tall, and he finds out that the leg room he paid for is not there. A flight is oversold, and he get a seat, but there's no leg room. He calls me up and says, "Dad, this is the worst day of my life." And I'm like, and it was 4:00 in the morning.
He didn't want to hear it, but the right response is, "That's a pretty good life."
Yeah, I said, I wish this was. I hope this is the worst day of your life.
That's right.
I hope that's the. And I basically said, like, think about, this is the negative visualization comes in perfectly. I said, you realize that the worst part that's happening to you, you'll be in the air conditioned airplane, where you'll be somewhat a little bit uncomfortable for 10 hours, but you're still going to be able to watch all these movies you want to watch and listen to the music. And so, is that really the worst thing? Is that really that bad? Could it be? Could things be a lot worse? He's like, yeah, I guess I can see it this way. So suddenly that relieved some of the pressure. And then when he was saying that the Lufthansa people at the counter were rude to him and dismissive, and I said, Jonah, like, did they get into your brain and just were hitting you on your brain, or you allowed them to make you feel bad? It's completely up to you how you take what they tell you, and it doesn't have to offend you. You can it's up to you how you frame it. So all those concepts come from Stoic philosophers. I mean, are they unique to Stoic philosophers? No, I mean, because they are part of everyday life, but it's just what Stoics do, they put them into this curriculum, right? And a lot of this, like, it's a common sense. It's just, the problem is, it's not that my parents never taught me this. Like, and the Stoic philosophy gives you this, kind of very simple curriculum that you can go through, and just making tiny little changes in your life, it could actually make your life so much happier.
One of the stories that you share that I think could be really relevant to the listener base was when, I'm not sure if that you had taken over control of IMA yet, or you were just helping, and you had a customer concentration issue, and you visualized that customer leaving. And then when they did leave, and I think you would agree that it was good that they left, they were measuring you on weekly performance, which is not what you do. It didn't hurt as bad.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, no, this is great. Yeah, so I was running IMA at the time already, but we were like, we were at $40-something million, and it was a $3 million account. That's
Yeah, that matters.
Yeah, today I wouldn't. Today it would make a difference. But then when we got the client, he told me, he read our brochure, he told me all the right things, and then maybe a month later or something, he starts checking our performance and and telling me if we underperformed or outperformed, like, on a weekly basis, which is insane. Like, I have zero insight what our stocks are gonna do on that time frame. Probably even 6 months or a year, on a year time frame. It's completely random. And yes, so what I did, I basically assumed that this client is gone. The problem is, like, today, if I had this client, I would probably proactively, gently nudge him to leave.
Yeah. But at the time, you couldn't.
At the time, we just couldn't afford it. So I basically visualized that, we lost them. And I made the internal decisions in capital allocation, within the company, assuming we lost him as well. So when he left, I was actually kind of relieved and it didn't really matter. That is so. I think that's a very good trick. Yeah. And by the way, when I did that, I had no idea about Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. But now it's part of the Stoic philosophy framework.
How you mentioned that stocks are completely random over the short term. How much do you take, if anything, from stock price movement? I mean, you've been doing this for a while now, and I'm curious, how many times have you seen stocks go way down and your thesis remains correct over the long term versus, how many times does price signal, if you have a sense of that?
That is such a good question. I think the price signal is completely lost and in fact, I almost stopped paying attention to this in a complete market sell-off.
Yeah.
Completely lost. But the thing is, what I say sounds obvious, but we still look for it. Which is, but even though
sometimes maybe even a little bit more in a sell-off, right? I know that may sound silly, but
yeah. And then I'm trying to think. There were a couple of times where I lost, where I really got hurt, where the market was so right and I was so wrong. So the adjustment I made from those experiences is that I double down on quality. So even if the market is right, if the quality is high, I'll be okay. And when I say quality is high, it's the three things. It's the balance sheet. It's the it's balance sheet. Probably in those situations, I start with the balance sheet first, because that's what gets you in trouble in the short term. That's immediate. Business rarely unglues overnight, though it does happen. But it's usually the balance sheet that's business. But then, and this is something I appreciate a lot more now than ever before, management. And what I'm going to, to your listeners or viewers, this is going to sound very banal because we all know this. But when you have somebody who owns a lot of their stock, when you have a management owns a lot of their stock, that is such a huge factor. And it's just so underappreciated, even though everybody knows that. It's so underappreciated. And I can tell you this, I am an owner of IMA. And I have terrific employees. They're terrific. But my heart will bleed exponentially more for IMA than everybody else's here. It's just impossible not to. It's just like Warren Buffett has this great, this is one of the annual meetings. Somebody asked, would they insure SpaceX when it goes to Mars or whatever, or to space? Oh, if there were astronauts or something, if SpaceX goes to space, he says, yeah, there will be one price if Elon Musk is on board, and another price if he isn't. But that tells you everything you need to know, right? Not that Elon Musk doesn't care if people will die, astronauts will die on his rocket. He cares deeply, but it's our programming. This is our innate programming to care about, yourself more than for others, or for your family more than for strangers, right? So anyway, so so in other words, if I own a company so to answer your question, if I own a company that's extremely high quality and the stock price declines and I don't understand it, I worry a lot less about this than the company where that's not the case.
Yeah, that makes sense. How have your views on position sizing changed, or as you've done this for a while? I came into this through the Buffett, but reading Buffett, right? And he's so pro concentration, and I'm so I'm willing to get concentrated, but it's not my natural tendency. I think I really need to see what I perceive to be a fat pitch.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a few stories. So I think in our industry, especially in the value investor crowd, position sizing, like being concentrated, is almost like measuring someone's manhood kind of thing. Oh, I only have 4
I was actually
positions.
thinking that.
Yeah. I remember, this is a true story. I forget the year. I think it was 2007 or 2008. I was speaking at the Value Investing Congress. And before the event, we went for dinner with other speakers. And I am sitting right next to Monish Pabrai. And I'm like, Monish, how can you have this portfolio that only has 10 stocks? That it's not like kind of, how do you sleep at night? He's like, listen, don't look at me. There's a guy, I'm not going to mention his name because it didn't end well for him. There's this guy next to us. He only has 3 stocks. Okay. Well, I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but he had a 3-stock portfolio. And that conference, he did a presentation on Kelly criterion. And he basically said, because of Kelly criterion, his 3 or 4 stock portfolio is plenty diversified. Well, the 6 months later, his largest position has exposure to natural gas. And at that time, I forget, the natural gas prices declined from $11 to $7 or something. And he said they can't go below 6 or something because that's below their production cost. Well, you know what happened after that, right? Because
they went to like 2 through the floor.
Yeah. So this guy, before that, he had a compounded 35% a year for 4 or 5 years. And then he lost it all in a matter of few weeks. So this is an extreme, so the position sizing, like, first of all, I would argue no matter what your position sizing is, like, unless you're managing your money, having, 3, like I would argue, owning 3 stocks is irresponsible. Unless you represent 2% of your clients, like some very small percentage of your clients' net worth.
Yeah, that makes sense because then they're diversified outside of that.
Yeah, then that's fine. It doesn't matter. The problem is, in his case, that was not, a lot of people give him all their money. So and I would argue that's those people's fault as well, because they just were magnetized by 35% a year track record, and they ignored the fact that he only has 3 or 4 stocks. And they looked in the past history and said, well, the last 5 years it worked, so it's going to work in the future. And which is I would argue that's not the right way to look at it, because over the last 5 years of observed history, it worked. But the future may look different from the past. So I think position sizing, so I'll give you a couple answers. Number one, on one side, when you have, so I give you the pitfalls of having 3-stock portfolio. Okay, so when you blow up, it's very difficult to recover from declining 30% or whatever, if one of your positions blows up. On the other side, like you look at a lot of mutual funds and they have 200 positions, they have 200 stocks and they're 50 basis points each. The over diversification, I would argue it's horrible as well. A couple of reasons. Number one, it's very difficult to stay on top of 200 stocks. Number two, it just leads to indifference. Like your 50 basis points position has doubled and you are up 1%.
Yeah, who really cares?
Yeah, who cares? Or it declines, 50%. Who cares? 20%. So I'd argue you need to get to the position, to the side, to the number of positions where every decision matters. But at the same time, that not one position can blow you up that you can't recover. And that is very important. So for us, so that has to, so you have to, your position sizing has to match your EQ. Okay. So for Manish Pabrai, that's a 10,000, I guess that's a 10-stock portfolio. I couldn't do this. At the same time, I have some friends who have 50-stock portfolio. I couldn't do that either. So we found that we need to be about 20, 25 positions. That's how many stocks we have. Now, and that's how many stocks we can cover and do very good research.
Yeah.
So our position sizing I look at it as a matrix. And I don't think I ever talked about it before. So we rank every company in our portfolio on quality. It goes from A to D. 90, probably 70% of the companies we own, maybe are A's, maybe some B's, 1 or 2 C's. And usually we don't buy a B, a C. It's a B that slips into a C.
Okay.
So, and the position sizing is, so that's the quality. And then we have a price to fair value for every company. So think about it. The higher the quality and the cheaper it is, it should be larger position. The lower the quality, the more expensive it is, should be small position. Kind of those two extremes. And so our positions basically go from 7 to 3%, roughly. And we have to make only 2 decisions. We have to figure out what the fair value is, and we have to figure out what the quality is. And then we have a spreadsheet that computes position size. So because what I find that when you buy a stock, you're usually infatuated by that. And so you're not as rational. Or when things go bad, it's the same thing. So you're not rational on the other side. So position size, and we put it in this very, this will become quants for a second, basically. Let me put it this way. But so, and this prevents us from blowing up.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So we kind of position size is, basically, it's our decision when we are the most rational. That's what limits our, that's what create, that's how, and that's basically how whole portfolio is constructed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've just noticed, I got pretty concentrated on Curate for a bit, and even with the way that turned out, it didn't hurt me that badly, right? I did end up writing a lot of the return back down, which stunk, but thankfully it was cheap and I knew what I was looking for. But that would be the only type situation that I think that I can live with getting too concentrated, which may sound silly to some people because it was sort of it was perceived as a risky bet at the time.
Well, I think what made Curate less risky is that you're getting your capital back.
Yeah.
That de-risk, to me, because we owned it too, to me, that's what de-risked the stock substantially.
Yeah. And then the world changed, right? So,
yeah.
It's something that I am trying to figure out how to cope with is hiring people. You talk about it you talked about covering 20 positions, which I would need somebody else to help me with, right? And then you talk about it a lot in the book, and you actually mentioned one of the things you like about Tesla is that they saved you time. And I know that you say you hire around your weaknesses and maximize your time.
Yeah.
When did you learn how to hire around your weaknesses, and what advice or what have you learned in hiring people that you think people should think about?
Yeah,
or maybe I should think about.
Yeah, so okay, let me make a small promotion here. So if you buy the book, if you go to
when you buy the book,
yes, let me program your subconscious mind.
That's right.
When you go buy the book. Right now. When you buy the book and you go to soulinthegame.net, there is an email address there. If you email your receipt, I'll send you 4 bonus chapters. And one of them, I wrote all of them after the book came out. There is 15 pages of my hiring travails in 2021 and how we basically created a brand new hiring process for IMA.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's not in the book. Yeah. Okay, but let's talk about hiring your weaknesses. So let me tell you one thing I learned. And this is going to sound so banal and so simple, but everybody has strengths and weaknesses. But what I started to do, I started to look at people, and a lot of times when they have very good strength, I stopped looking at their weaknesses as weaknesses, but look at their weaknesses as the source of their strength.
Interesting.
So let me give an example. I am a creative person. Okay. I'm not a very organized person. And if I try to be very organized, it would consume a huge amount of effort for me.
Dude, I would be so tired if I was super organized. It would be insane.
Exactly. So it's the same here. So, and that is just the source, the lack of organization. That's actually what gives me, makes me creative, right? So I have an assistant. If I hired an assistant who was disorganized as I am, we would have a problem.
Not so.
Okay. So I have this terrific assistant, Barbara, who is incredibly organized, but I would argue she is not that creative. And I could be upset. Like, so you know what I do? I don't give her creative tasks.
Yeah.
And I could get upset about her being, of her not being creative. Or I can realize that, well, this is why she's so organized. And every, so this is, you'll be able to, since you're a podcaster, like you can relate to this. Well, in addition to other things. So we created a podcast. We have what I call a lazy man's podcast, which is basically my articles read to you by this guy, Elliot. Okay. So when I came up with this idea, I basically my marketing guy wanted me to do a podcast for a long time. I never wanted to do it because I don't like it. I love being a guest on a podcast, but I know how much effort, how much energy it consumes for me to create this podcast. And that's not something I wanted to do. So I came up with this idea. So I'm going to write articles. We're going to have a guy read them. And it's going to be almost like an article on tape. Or that's what my podcast is. So I have a terrific, very creative marketing guy. I basically said, I want you to create this. He spent a month doing all the research and figured out everything we need to do. In fact, he created the whole podcast. He hired the guy on Upwork who was going to read my articles. We created the website. We chose the service. We went through this whole thing. We created the art for the podcast. He did this whole thing. Then he produced the first 5 episodes, created the process for that. And now Barbara produced the last 150 episodes.
Huh. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if I ask Anton to to do the last 150 podcasts, number one, probably not the right use of his time. But more importantly, he would be miserable and he probably would not do a good job of getting things on time because he is very creative and not as organized. And Barbara, Anton has created a process for her that she follows perfectly. And she does a great job of getting the podcast done. So that realization that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. And I just want to make sure when I hire somebody, I really need that strength, for that job, and I'm fine with that weakness. And so there are a couple more lessons here. When you recognize that everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and this is going to sound banal as well, teamwork becomes extremely, extremely important.
Yeah. Because
now you have to, one person, Barbara has to go to somebody else, to Anton, and say, can you help me with this? And which is a creative task. And Anton has to be able to go to Barbara and say, can you help me with this? And so that requires teamwork. So when usually, they have this teamwork posters, etc. And usually when you have anything turned into a poster, you kind of become almost desensitized to it because it's you see it everywhere. You start thinking about it. Well, it's actually, unfortunately, but actually it's incredibly important in the firm that the teamwork, and especially when you have this framework that you have strengths and weaknesses and then somebody else. And for us to work better together, it's almost like, in economics and macroeconomics, you have comparative advantages.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And so just for that to work, for comparative advantages to work, you need to have free trade, right? So
yes,
it's kind of like,
indeed.
Yeah. So on the micro level of a small company, that free trade is teamwork.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, you want to make sure that people you hire share your values. And I try to explain what our values are before we hire. And I want to make sure, and this is one of those things that people will tell you what you want to hear, but you really find out if you share your values only kind of in all honesty after the fact. And then you have to follow this advice that I heard somewhere: if hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah.
So, and that's, so if somebody is not, their values don't fit our firm, then, you have to get rid of them because they're going to poison everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The firing fast is, it's tough, but right.
You know what I found, and I had to fire 3 people last year. And that essay that I wrote, that's in the bonus chapter, it's written like in Russian, there is an expression, it's written in blood. Like the victory. Well, it's written, that article is written in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Because firing people, it was so painful because I basically had to tell somebody, well, what I thought I was saying, I don't like you. Okay?
Yeah.
But I reframed it. Like, actually, since I reframed it, I realized actually I'm doing them a favor because they'll be miserable and I'll be miserable. And I'm sure there's a job that is a better fit for them. That they're going to find a job that is better fit. So everybody we let go, we were very humane. And etc. about this. And I try, but at the same time, I'm sure they're at a better place now than, they were here, when they were here.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because you're impacting people's family and their livelihood. But like you said, I mean, if they're not performing, they're going to know it. And then they're not going to be particularly happy where they're at. So letting them move on is the humane thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, man. I got to figure out, I need a little bit of help around here, but, not the easiest thing to hire up in a bear market, but, it's something I know I need to do in order to unlock time in my life. I'm just hitting a lot of time blocks and I know I need people around me to bust out of that.
So let me tell you one hack I have, which is has been incredibly important to us. I say this, and I don't own the stock yet. Upwork. We have hired a lot of people on Upwork to offset some of our weaknesses. In fact, originally, my assistant Barbara came to us from Upwork, and she lives there. She's been with me for 4 years, and she's in Argentina.
Huh.
And but then, whenever I need some specific skill, and we found Upwork to be incredibly important. I'll give you an example. My book, The Soul in the Game, is literally right now been translated into Russian because I wanted my uncle and my stepmom to read it. And I hired a guy from Kiev, from Odessa, on Upwork. We have a guy, if you go on the Contrarian Edge, you see this beautiful art. Drawings for my articles. That's done by a guy, his name is Hazen, and he's in Mexico. The guy who is recording a podcast, Elliot, he's in Canada. Again, hired him up work. So if you actually look, I may has 8 people working here, but we probably use another 8 or 9 contractors that do other things for us. That have a unique, kind of unique skills. So if you need an assistant,
I desperately do. Like you were talking about scheduling and whatnot, and how if it's only 4 times a day, but it's 5 minutes, that's 20 minutes a week. Like that stuff adds up. I get buried in administrative stuff a little too much. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I think just I talk about in the book. I talk about in the personal finance chapter. I talk about some categories where I don't, where I have a loose budgets.
Yeah,
and one of them is buying time.
Yep.
And I'm sure I self-talked myself into it. So my subconscious, I was the worst follower of my own advice. But I absolutely hate doing assembling IKEA furniture.
I understand that.
Some people listen to it and think, and they just lost the respect for me right there.
I did it a lot as a kid. I'm too old for that now.
I just get agitated, and it just if you ask me to do anything, piece computers or anything creative, I'll be right there. But I follow instructions, and it just like it's so, yeah. Anyway, so I'm trying to convince my wife that, she should not look at your husband to do this, but hire somebody to do this. And this is a kind of a constant debate we have. So I think I have this brother that I love dearly, who loves doing this. So my wife, instead of hiring somebody, just asked my brother to come and do it.
That I understand.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think around the house, my wife would argue that she kind of wishes that I was a little more handy, but she knew who she married when she married me. So I never promised I'd change.
Good.
I do. There's a lot of curse words that fly when I start fixing stuff around the house.
I think at the end what happens, she wishes I didn't do it because I break things. I just, yeah. So it's...
We need to hire somebody eventually anyway. And I've gone to Home Depot twice and nothing has worked out. So I do wish that I had those skills a little bit better, but then again, I've never done anything to change it. So how bad do I actually want it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, what else do you want to talk about, man? I'm here for you.
Well, you actually read the book, which I was somewhat surprised, but
come on now.
Why? But I don't know why. I don't really know why. I didn't expect you to read it. I don't know why. It's absolutely, you gave me no reason to think that.
Well, I'm a little surprised when people that come on here actually listen to the podcast, so I can understand it. I think it's maybe a little bit of a defense mechanism.
Possibly, and maybe it's just such a different subject than investing.
Yeah, you put a lot into it, man. I really liked your chapter on personal budgeting. I thought that was a fantastic chapter.
So it's the irony of this, because I'm in the finance industry, people think I'm giving advice as a kind of finance professional. I'm not. I'm just I have a data, what it is just how I do this. It doesn't and this is not because I took all this, financial planning classes, etc., whatever. I haven't. I kind of when I was growing up, I thought if you may just make a lot of money, you're never going to have money problems.
Yeah, not so.
Right. And you actually, and I listened to your podcast, and I know, based on your family, that's not the case.
This is true. This is definitely true.
So what I found, I want to spend more time thinking about this, and I'm going to write more on this, on mindfulness. And what is mindfulness? The best way to say is, what is mindlessness? Mindlessness is when we do things on autopilot.
Okay.
When we do things because we do things. And I would argue a lot of things that happen in our personal finance happen mindlessly. You wake up in the morning and you go to work and you stop by Starbucks. Why do you stop by Starbucks? Because at some point you did it and now you're doing it.
Yeah, now it's your habit.
Yeah, now it's your habit. And then you do something else, etc. And then the sum of these decisions basically impacts your budget, right? Mm-hmm. So if you create a budget, there's so many lessons. If you create a budget, number one, you start prioritizing what matters to you. Okay? Because that's what budget is. It's just basically, if you go to Starbucks and you receive a huge amount of enjoyment from drinking coffee, then that should be on a higher level in your budget. Okay? If you go to Starbucks and you're really just doing it because you were doing it and you kind of mindlessly, and you don't even care about the coffee, then probably it should be, lower in the budget. And maybe that becomes a source to pay for something, Chipotle burritos. Okay? And when you when you create budgets, you're saying, I value this more than this. And remember, if you value everything, you value nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And so you do need to make these decisions. What I value more, what I value less. And by the way, money buys you more when it buys you what you value.
Yeah. I buy that.
Yeah. So that's a lesson number one. Lesson number two, and your audience is probably too sophisticated for that lesson. But if you're younger, that was a very important lesson for me. When we got married, my wife and I have a friend, Mark Bauer. He's 10 years younger, and I was 28, and at the time he was 38. And that was a huge age difference because he was mature than me by a factor of 5, probably. And he took us to lunch, and he gave us this kind of, it wasn't quite rich dad, poor dad kind of thing, but it was kind of he told us about budgeting, and I was a bit insulted because I had a CFA at the time, and I'm like, listen, I have a master's degree in finance, I got a CFA, and I know how the income statement works, this kind of thing. But then he basically,
this is probably my favorite chapter that you're discussing right now. By the way,
really?
Yeah, it probably says something about what I needed to hear.
Oh, well, okay, I'm glad. But there's something for everybody in the book, right?
Yeah.
And then he told me about the sinking funds, right? And basically, just think about when we create the budget, we put there things we can absorb at this point in time. Okay, the cable bill, the rent, etc., all these different things. But there are so many expenses that happen to us over time and we know they're going to happen. They just not happen in this moment in time that we don't think about it when we create a budget. Your car insurance has a deductible. At some point, you're going to have a car accident, so you probably want to have some money saved for emergencies. Okay, so that should be at some point you're going to need to buy. And I was writing this when TVs were very expensive. I think we were buying a $2,000 TV. So actually, at the time, we were actually saving money for the TV. Now they cost a lot less. But there are some things you're going to buy. You're going to buy new furniture every 5 or 10 years. You're going to go on vacations, and and you're going to retire. So what you want to do? You want to identify all the
kids.
You're going to have kids, and
kids are more expensive. This is probably why I've been thinking about it. Like, I've got my middle is into golf, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be expensive. It's I love this chapter. I thought it was great advice.
Well, and so anyway, you're exactly right. So anyway, you identify all these expenses that are going to happen in the future, and then you're going to put them, again, there's a whole bunch of financial geeks listen to it. Think of it as a depreciation of the future expenses into present, right? Except the depreciation is in the financial statements. It may look a non-cash expense, but actually you make it a cash expense. You put that money in the sinking fund. I'm so glad, by the way, I can use the financial language when I talk to your listeners because they actually get it. Okay, just turn the depreciation into current capex. How's that?
Yeah.
Anyway, and suddenly what you find that you have a lot less money to spend on frivolous things. And the most important part, because what gets us in trouble is that those kind of one-time expenses that really not one time, and this is how we get into debt. And once you get into debt, it's a treadmill to hell, basically. So that's again, I'm doing a much better job explaining it in the chapter. Yeah, but I think that's an important lesson that I had a friend, Mark, who taught me that. It's kind of funny when this book is dedicated to my kids, and it says to Jonah, Hannah, and Mia, Sarah, because you don't read my emails. and that is, and so if you think, this is exactly what I wanted actually my kids to. So my son read half of that and he listened to the whole thing on the audiobook. He was actually proofreading the audiobook. My daughter Hannah read the whole thing, and my 8-year-old Mia Sarah, she listened to some chapters on audio on the audio version. But it's really, a lot of it is advice for my kids, but for other kids too. And that's
Do I count as a kid? Because I got some good advice out of it.
And for me too, remember I wrote a stock chapter for myself. So it's for my kid, so it's And
the thing I like about it, man, is these chapters are what? They're 4 or 5 pages long, is a long one. Some are 2. And it's kind of like your thoughts that you've collected through life.
And they are, because a lot of them were my articles that turned into a kind of, that went into the book. But, I tell you, this book is almost like becoming like a chick flick. Because what happened is, like, think about it, probably 80 people who read my articles there was a very good overlap between people who read my articles and who listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, it's probably 90% male.
Yes. If the data that I get is correct, then yes, it's about 90% male. Yes. Between 25 and 40.
Wow. Yeah. So same thing with people who read my investment articles. But then I started to get emails from people who bought the book, and they said, I bought the book for myself, and now my wife is reading it, and and she's loving it as much as I do. And in fact, it's kind of became something we do together now with my wife. And that makes me feel so good, because I'm not just helping, I'm helping now the whole family.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome. If you can get the wives to start listening to the pod, please do. I wish my stats weren't the way they are, but seems the finance skews heavily male.
Well, I tell you this, my wife did not read neither one of my books until this one. So, yeah, she read this one, but she didn't read my Active Value Investing. She did not read the little book, Sideways Markets, or my Tesla book, but she did read this one. So, yeah.
What as somebody who wrote the little book of Sideways Markets and Active Value Investing, and has on your website a sell discipline, what did you take of The Art of Not Selling, and then that getting turned into Never Sell?
Well, I think listen, I think about what happens to you when you sell during the never-ending bull markets. It's every single time you sell, you've been taught a lesson not to sell, right?
Yeah.
And then it's over time, it becomes kind of a religion. And then that religion gets destroyed by bear markets and then sideways markets. I would argue it's kind of interesting. I have zero interest on updating my sideways markets book. It's not interesting to me. But I would argue this book does not require updating, because it's more relevant today. It's actually more relevant today than when I wrote it. Because at the time I wrote it started writing in 2005, and we're already 5 years into this kind of sideways market. And I would argue that today we are like in the year one or something of a new sideways market. So that book is actually more relevant today than it was then. And if you decide to get one of those books, like either Active Value Investing in sideways markets, number one, you have to buy the Soul in the Game first. Then if you decide to get the other one of the two, so my advice would be, if you want a very quick and easy read, get the little book of Sideways Markets, because it is basically a derivative of Active Value Investing. Active Value, Wiley has a series called the Little Books of, and John Bogle wrote one, and James Matier, etc.
Yeah, Greenblatt.
Yeah.
I think Jim Rogers did. It's a good series.
Yeah. No, I think by the way, in general, it's a very good series of books, because, like, especially, I'll give you one example. James Matier has a great book called Behavioral Investing, which I read. And then he wrote the little book of Behavioral Investing. I would argue it's so much better. Just because what happens when you write for him to write, and same thing with me, actually, for him to write, he couldn't have written the little book of Behavioral Investing without writing the first one, the big one. Because I would not have the confidence to write the little book, because all the data was in the big book. So, and that gave me the confidence to say, if somebody questions what I'm saying, I say, well, just go spend $35 and buy another book, and you see where the data came from.
Yeah.
And as a writer, that confidence is actually extremely important. Also, I would argue Little Book is a better book because I was able to take my Active Value Investing and rewrite things better and simplify things and just leave the end of the essence. And it's from it's a much easier read. However, if you're looking for all the details, if you're like a diehard super value investor, you may actually benefit from the active value investing.
Yeah.
If you just want to get a light read, the little book is better.
Yeah. No, I like it. I think they're good lessons. I think people will be revisiting them. I'm glad. I'm glad I learned a lot in the last bull market. I'm glad that it extended my brain in many ways, and I'm glad that I avoided some of the traps. And I'm not sure that another one's not going to start, but I wouldn't put a high probability on that.
Well, there's something I always wanted to tell you, and I think I told you this in private, but I think it deserves to be. I have this tremendous admiration for you for basically not trying to show yourself as the person who knows it all, and be willing to be vulnerable, which is not something that people do in our profession. And for just being open, with your struggles when you go through them. And I think that's what makes you unique, and just you're willing to be your authentic self in public. And I cannot tell you how much I enjoy that honesty that I see, that you're not trying to hide, the pains you went through or going through, etc. And I think that's that's one of the qualities I admire about you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it's why we connected, right? And it's led to a lot of great things. So I don't know. I'm going to continue to do it. It's been fun, and it's led to great connections, and I've learned a lot, man. I started out on this journey trying to learn. I think one of the things that has been a little bit of a struggle is sometimes when you're in people's ear, they impute a lot of knowledge on you that I'm not sure is warranted. So I just hope that people really take do your own due diligence seriously, because I mean it. When I publish articles, if I look at I used to write a lot more about individual stocks than I do now. So when I write letters to clients, it's 30 pages, and probably 20 pages of them are about individual stocks via one of the client's accounts. But I noticed that I publish fewer and fewer individual stocks, and the reason for that, outside, in public. The reason for that, because one thing I find is that sometimes people just read my article and buy the stock. That's it. And do zero research. And that really, really bothers me. The reason it bothers me, because I may change my mind tomorrow. Because that's what, because facts change, because I learn new information, whatever. But I don't feel I have an obligation to communicate that to my subscribers. And it's also important in the context of my portfolio and how much I actually allocated to this position. Because I may be writing about a company, and it's 3% position, right? And somebody takes and puts 30% of the money into this, the stock. So when people listen to a podcast, when people read my articles, what you want to learn from them is the process of thinking. And this is why I share them. Because I'm sharing different mental models. I'm sharing how I think about that. But I have a portfolio of stocks, right? And by definition, not all of them going to work out. And it just happened to be that the one I wrote about, the one I published, is the one that won't work out. So, but I think people that listen to your podcast, there is so much they can learn from you. But the last thing they should learn is that, I bought this stock, I should go and buy this. Yeah, I think that's right. When I used to do more single stock ideas on Value After Hours for a while, that was kind of like what I would do. I don't know, man. I'd be lying if I said some of it wasn't like insecurity driven and trying to prove something. And I just kind of don't feel like I have that anymore. So I think people should expect less ideas out of me, not more. But if I'm doing research and I'm like deep in something, I'm still going to ask single stock questions. But I don't know that I'm going to advertise single stock conclusions nearly as much as I once did.
I think that's smart.
Yeah. Well, turns out that a lot of people that have been in the business longer than I say that is smart, and they were right. And I was, ignorant to how right they would be.
I think sometimes in life you need to make your own mistakes, but then as you learn from them, just don't make them again. Yeah. No,
what's funny is the commitment and consistency stuff. I really, to this day, I don't think I suffer from that much, because I'll flip on a name pretty quickly. Like once I see what I'm looking for goes the wrong way, I'm out. But to your point, I don't feel the need to update people on what I've done. Naked Wines is one today that got totally destroyed. And I had talked about that on a previous podcast. And, I hope nobody bought it. I sold it a long time ago when I perceived them to have inventory issues. And I don't like talk about that, and it was never big anyway. So it's just really hard.
I have a rule. I never, ever, ever write about or even talk about tiny companies.
Yeah.
Just because it's very difficult. Like there's when I talk about a small company and people buy it, it's going to move the stock.
Yeah.
And there will be a perception that I wrote that, even though it's not, that's not why I did it, that I did it to move the stock.
Yeah, no, you can't win in that situation.
Yeah. And I just never want that to be people ever confuse, think that, I wrote about a company to move the stock. So if I ever talk about a company in public now, usually very large, usually a company where, I can talk about as much as I want. It's not going to move the stock. And another thing, like in fact, a couple months ago, in fact, the conference, I'm not going to mention the company, but you and I went to a conference in Richmond, and I presented this company, and it was a small company. And I ended up doing a write-up about a few mental models I learned when I was researching the company. And I published those mental models, but I never published my stock idea. So that's why I never talk about, like, at a small conference where it's a tiny group of small and sophisticated investors. I may talk about small company, and people will be, because I know those people will be making the decision after they'll hear my idea and they'll do their own research. But I will never ever talk about a tiny company in public, just because this perception is just very difficult to wash off.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and it's definitely definitely where I'm going with the way that I do things too.
And by the way, Bill, just in all fairness, I didn't come to that overnight. Like in late 2008, I think I owned Joseph A. Banks, which was a $400 million, $500 million market cap company. And I was very public about our ownership. And I was not trying to move the stock, but I just wrote my thoughts and my analysis. And now, today, I would never do this. So my point is, I learned from the experience that, because some people actually thought that I was trying to move the stock, which we really didn't. I was just sharing my thoughts. And at the time, I was less known than I am today. So it's, don't feel bad that you're making the same mistakes. I mean, you're kind of, because I made them before and now I don't make them, and I'm just a little bit older than you. So
yeah, well, I think what I might do is I may ping a couple people and say, can you send me the mistakes that you used to talk about that I just didn't pay attention to, and this time I'm ready to receive them, right? And then I won't make them from now on.
That's right. Yeah, so I'll take it more seriously this time. Yeah.
Well, sir, I have a child that is screaming in the background, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. I have sincerely enjoyed talking to you, man, and thank you for coming on. We've been talking about doing this for a long time.
Exactly. I wanted to wait until the book comes out, so because this is I knew this is the only way I get you to read the book. So that's why I did.
I would have read the book. I read the chapter on the Stoics when you sent it to me. But I am glad that we did this, and I really did enjoy it. I hope that someday I have the courage to write something similar. I think the podcast is my form of it for now, but I really I enjoyed it, man, and I thank you for sharing what you've learned, because I know that I have pages marked, I've got stuff flipped down, and I've got notes on the pages in the margins. So I will be revisiting it.
Well, this is great. No, I'm glad, and I'm glad we do this podcast. And again, I'm a huge fan, and you're doing a phenomenal job. And I'm glad we had an opportunity to do this. And
well, likewise, sir. It's mutual admiration. So I look forward to future connections, and we'll speak soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill.
But it's absolutely necessary. But it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you for listening. Inflation has been on everyone's mind these days. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to hear Vitaliy's take on inflation, check out episodes 128, 129, and 140 of this podcast at investor.fm. Enjoy life and prosper.